Philosophy deals with the big questions. Questions that are so big, it can be hard to know where to start. This course is specifically designed to give you an introduction to philosophy that not just helps you get access to these big questions, but helps you get started on your own way in thinking about them. I've specially selected 10 arguments that I think are particularly helpful in provoking philosophical thought and reflection. And these are arguments that I've drawn from a wide range of sources, from the ancient world to the present day, and from a variety of different philosophical cultures. What all these arguments have in common is that they result in conclusions that in some way might surprise us, perhaps even unsettle us. And because they do that, they force us to reflect on how the philosopher reached that conclusion. I think that's important for two reasons. One is that philosophy fundamentally consists of arguments. What makes a great philosopher great isn't that they had some amazing idea, but what makes them great is the way that they work toward the conclusions that they reach. That a really great philosopher can start from fairly evident starting points and get you somewhere that you didn't expect. The second reason is that philosophy is an activity. It's something you do. And in this course, I want to make sure that we're not just encountering what other people thought, but that we're thinking with them, we're interrogating their thoughts, we're trying to develop thoughts of our own. Because it's only in engaging with them in that way that we're properly learning what philosophy is. So what are these 10 arguments? Well, let me tell you. In the first unit, we look at an excerpt from Plato's dialogue, the Gorgias, in which Plato's mentor Socrates engages in a dialogue with his opponent Polus. Now, Polus argues that tyrants are the happiest people there are because they are powerful and they can do whatever they want. And Socrates then leads Polus through a series of questions and answers that lead to the conclusion that, in fact, tyrants are the most miserable people there are. And they're miserable because they aren't powerful and they don't do what they want. And in fact, it would be better to be punished by a tyrant than to be the tyrant themselves. The second unit looks at a chapter from the ancient Chinese Taoist text, the ZHUANGZI, which turns on its head all of our ordinary conceptions of right and wrong. Instead, the ZHUANGZI suggests so much of what we take for moral certainty is in fact just a matter of perspective or the particular point of view that we take on things. In the third unit, we look at the MILINDAPANHA, the questions of King Milinda, which is one of the earliest texts in the Buddhist philosophical tradition. Here we see the Buddhist monk Nagasena engaging in a dialogue with the Greco-Bactrian king Milinda, or Menander, and presenting Milinda with an argument to the effect that there is really no such thing as a self at all. That what we call a self is just a composite of many parts, and in none of those parts do we find anything that is rightfully called a self. In our fourth unit, we turn to the world of medieval Islam and look at an excerpt from Ibn Tufail's philosophical novel, Hayy ibn Yaqdhan. This is a novel that was one of the inspirations, in fact, for Daniel Defoe's novel, Robinson Crusoe. It tells the story of a boy, Hayy, who is raised on a deserted island and comes first to understand the world around him before looking up and contemplating the heavens and coming to develop ideas about the nature of God himself. Over the course of the story, Hayy believes that he can prove through reason alone the existence of God, but Ibn Tufail adds a further twist that only through a particular kind of mystical experience is this knowledge of God truly completed. From there, we turn to early modern Europe in our fifth unit and look at one of the most confounding arguments in European philosophy. This is David Hume's famous argument about induction and causation. We form all sorts of beliefs based on past experience, Hume says, ranging from the fact that I believe the sun will rise tomorrow to the fact that if I let a ball drop, it will fall to the floor. But, Hume argues, as firm as those beliefs may be, they aren't rationally justified, and we're mistaken to think that they are. In the sixth unit, we turn to the bad boy of German philosophy, Friedrich Nietzsche, who argues in the first essay of his Genealogy of Morals that all of the moral principles that we think of as based on a certain kind of goodness, charity, kindness, meekness, humility, all of these are fundamentally derived from hatred and resentment. In the last 4 units of the course, we turn our attention to philosophers who are still alive today, starting in the 7th unit with Peter Singer's famous drowning child analogy. Singer says, if you were to walk by a child drowning in a shallow pond, and you could save the child's life at the cost of getting your new clothes a bit dirty, it's not just that that would be a nice thing to do, it would be morally wrong not to do it. But this is exactly the position, Singer says, that we are in with regard to poor and suffering people in distant countries. That it might be a small inconvenience to us to make donations that would save their lives. But it's not just that it's nice of us to donate to charity. It's morally wrong not to give most of what we have to helping others. In the 8th unit, we look at a recent essay by the philosopher Amiya Srinivasan called The Right to Sex. Srinivasan argues that who I am sexually attracted to and how and why are all political questions, that my sexual desires have been shaped by the politics of the world around me. And in the same way that I can subject the politics of the world around me to rational critique, likewise, I can and should do so with my own desires. In the 9th unit, we look at a chapter from a recent book by the philosopher MYISHA called The Case for Rage. Now, anger gets a bit of a bad rap in the history of philosophy. A lot of philosophers argue for different reasons why anger is bad, it's dangerous, it conjures up all sorts of emotions and prevents us from reasoning clearly. Cherry wants to argue that anger actually can be good. And not just good, but important, as long as we learn to direct it appropriately. In our 10th and final unit, we look toward the future with the famous simulation argument by the philosopher Nick Bostrom. Bostrom argues that it is conceivable that some future post-human society might develop the technological means to run what he calls an ancestor simulation, to run a simulation of the past history of the world that is so fine-grained that if you were a part of this simulation, you wouldn't know the difference. And he argues, there's a pretty good probability that the world that we think we're inhabiting is, in fact, one of these simulations. Your course fee gives you access to the texts of all of these 10 arguments, and also to 10 video lectures that I've put together that accompany the texts. Each one of these lectures ranges from about 45 to 65 minutes, and what I try to do is I unpack the argument, try to make it as clear as I can, while also raising questions about how we might want to engage with these arguments, interrogate them, submit them to scrutiny, and think about them for ourselves. And if you don't want to think about them on your own, for an additional fee, I'd be very happy to talk through them with you. I set up a second option where you can also book a couple of Zoom sessions with me where we can discuss these issues one-on-one together. I think of philosophy as a grand adventure. There are so many exciting ideas to explore and investigate. I've had a lot of fun putting together this particular journey, and I really hope you'll join me on it.